So today we're going to cover disadvantages for DAs and how to answer them when you're affirmative. Okay, so first off, what is a DA? It's a piece of offense that the negative team runs. It's an off-case position, meaning it must be run in the 1NC. Of course, the 2NC does exist and it's called constructive. However, it's basically an unspoken rule that you're not supposed to run new off-case in the 2NC. Judges generally don't like it, and you can get theory run against you against it. Also, if you do run it, it makes it a lot messier, and it makes the 1AR a lot less of a burden for them to answer, especially if they go for theory. So overall, just keep it in the 1NC. Overall, a TA is just something bad that occurs due to the F-bland passing. There's 3 or arguably 4 parts to it. There's uniqueness, link, internal link, and the impact. Internal link is the kind of other one, but generally it's just a link that happens after the link. So it's like a chain of links that happen, or a link chain as we like to call it. Alright, so first let's look at uniqueness. What this is saying is it's essentially saying what's happening in the status quo. It's a reason why it's good. So an example would be the economy is good now. And there's multiple ways to handle uniqueness that could be covered in a more in-depth lecture. For example, there's brink uniqueness, where it says the economy is on the brink of collapse now, as an example. But then there's other ones as well, such as the economy is headed towards a recession. However, the AF plan would expedite that and bring it to a faster pace. There's a ton of different ways, and I don't have enough time to explain it in just this one basic lecture. But that's a more in-depth thing that you could look towards when it comes to uniqueness. But generally you're going to see stuff like econ good now, or we're on the brink. Those are the most common ones. Next is the link. It's how the AF relates to DA. It shows how the AF takes the status quo off course and leads to a bad thing. Example would be how the plan wrecks the economy. So there could be multiple links, such as internal links as I discussed earlier, to get the impact you want. So for example, if you want an impact about cyber attacks, but you can't get there with one link card, you can set up multiple link cards to get to that point. So if your link card is about how it hurts the economy, you can set up another link card that says something like a decreased recession would lead to decreased cybersecurity, and thus decreased cybersecurity leads to cyber attacks. So that's just an example. I don't know if there's a scenario like that. You could probably research it if you want. But that's just an example I could think of a link chain, because if you want to get to that chain and you want that specific impact, you're going to have to do the work and make that time investment. Alright, and then you have the impact. This is probably the most important part of the DA, because it essentially shows why it matters. Because if you have uniqueness and link, if that's just all you have, like womp womp, who cares? The impact is actually what's going to matter, and it's going to be the thing you emphasize to the judge the most, because it's what actually is the effect of the affirmative team's plan. So an example would be economic decline would lead to an armed conflict, and you could say that goes nuclear or whatever scenario you want to go with. So overall, impact is just going to be the huge thing you're going to emphasize the most, and it's what happens because of the DA. So here's a full example. So this is the investments DA. It's a DA I created last year for the fiscal redistribution topic. It was kind of like an edited version of a different DA, but here's what I ran as it. So first was uniqueness. It showed that billionaires are investing in climate reduction technologies now. It showed that the status quo is good because billionaires are making these investments to help fight against climate change. Next, there was the link. It showed that taxing the rich would kill investments needed to reduce climate change. This was a pretty general link card that we had because most of the apps, in order to be topical, had to implement taxes that would affect the wealthy. And thus, this was a pretty common link card that we were able to use against most apps. But generally, it's better to have more specific ones. But if you're going up against a new app that you haven't seen before, the generic ones are always fine, because if it links, it links. So yeah. And then finally there was the impact. It showed that climate change leads to extinction. So overall, this is just showing the impact that climate change could have. It's probably going to be a really common one, and I recommend you go for it because of all the different gateways you can get with climate change. So that was last year though. There's going to be some big DAs this year that I want to talk about. Alright, so first there's court clock. What this disadvantage argues is right now in the status quo, the courts are either unclogged or they're inventing new ways to help reduce congestion in the courts. So there's less cases they have to deal with and they're able to function more effectively. The link is that changes to IP causes a huge new wave of cases to come in because of these changes. It would bring in old cases that have to be revisited, and then new cases from new patents, trademarks, or copyright that wants to be filed. Thus, that would clog the courts again. Then there's a ton of different impacts you go with for court clog. You could say it hinders the ability to adopt new climate policies, hinders ways to reduce water wars, hinders data protection cases. There's a ton of different ways to go for it, and I think it's probably going to be one of the biggest DAs this year. Then there's the innovation DA. This is mostly going to be applicable to exclusively patents, but maybe you could find some stuff for copyrights and trademarks. What this is saying is that right now, innovation within whichever sector their scenario goes for is good now. However, the link says that patents hurt innovation. The reason they hurt innovation is because of the fact that when these big companies are able to hold patents, smaller companies are less likely to take the risk of trying to invent new technologies because they're going to see that these big companies have patents that have armies upon armies of lawyers, and they don't want to take that risk of having to go to court and handle an infringement case because they simply don't have the resources to deal with that because they're small companies. And so it argues that because of that, patents harm innovation overall. The impact is that whichever technology or sector they have high innovation in, decreased innovation is going to harm that because whatever technology is key to whatever. A big one is healthcare, or from what I've seen so far, and healthcare is key to prevent disease or pandemics that would eventually lead to extinction. Then there's elections. So what this is arguing is Kamala Harris will win the 2024 election now. However, the plan is perceived as unpopular and voters don't like it. Because of that, they're going to look at it as a Kamala policy because right now she's the VP and policies are kind of being tossed onto her because Biden's actions are kind of being attached to hers. And so when the voters see this plan is passed, they're going to take it out on Kamala, and thus that's going to hurt her approval ratings, causing her to lose the election. Then on the impact, you're either going to say Kamala winning is good or Trump winning is bad. So for either of those instances, there's a ton of different impacts. If you go for the Kamala good route, you're going to want to say climate policies, and if you're going to go for the Trump bad route, you can argue protectionism or just international relations. But these aren't the only TAs you could make. There's also tons of others that you could just make up yourself. Part of my favorite aspects of debate is just coming up with my own ideas for GAs and being able to run them and like surprise people with them. Alright, now I want to cover answering disadvantages when you're on the affirmative. First, you want to have front lines prepared. What front lines are their answers that you have set up that you're going to read against them every 2AC whenever you hit whatever GA. So you're going to have these prepared as your go-to answer. Frontlines are important because they save you valuable prep time that you shouldn't be spending too much of on 2AC. And so instead of taking each individual cards from your non-unique section and no link section and no impact section, you have the frontline there so you can take them all at once and put them into your speech doc. That saves you valuable time and it should be there. Also just help with organization. It's very useful and I highly recommend you do it if you're not already doing it. And then also, assuming you have time, you should be attacking all three parts, which would be great. I'm assuming the people watching this are either from the Missouri circuit or from the Indiana circuit, based off just what I've seen from the community so far and people looking at like the lab. But yeah, assuming you are, people aren't going to be running that much off case, so you should have time to attack all three. But if they are running a bunch of different arguments and you can only go for some, I'd recommend just try and go for a straight turn first, which is going for a non-unique argument plus link turn, because that essentially turns it into an advantage. I'll cover that later in the lecture, but yeah, if you do have time, it's not necessary to attack all three parts, it's just something that would be recommended. Okay, First, there's the attacks on the uniqueness. First, there's not unique. It says the status quo is already bad. So carrying on with the economy example, you'd say the economy is already declining, or it's already bad. So then you're saying the status quo isn't good and it's already struggling. The affirmed team's plan doesn't change that because it's already bad. Then there's uniqueness overwhelms the link. It argues that the status quo is so strong and solidified that the link simply won't have any effect on it. An example, okay, how I used to explain it is think of this. There's Timmy and Jimmy. So they're the best of friends, right? And Timmy lets Jimmy borrow his pen that he's been using for like 3 years now. But Jimmy loses said pen. But because Timmy and Jimmy are the best of friends, Timmy doesn't care at all and they're still going to remain friends after that. I know that's a weird example kind of to explain it, but that's the best way I have of explaining it. If you're still confused by that, just reach out to me and I'm willing to answer any questions and maybe explain it a different way. Then there's the thumper. So this is it's saying that something has happened or it's going to happen in the near future that's going to make the DA non-unique. So carrying on with the economy example, it'd just be like this new policy that's being passed or this new action being taken by the US or something that the US just did is going to crush the economy. Thus, it's not going to matter. The economy is already going to be crushed or it is being crushed in the status quo, regardless of if the AF plan is passed or not. Then there's the attacks on the link you can make. So first, there's no link. It argues that the AF has no effect on what the DA claims. So just carrying on with the economy example, AF does not affect the economy. It's a pretty simple argument to make, and it's pretty simple to convey. Then there's the link turn. So it says that the AF does the opposite of what the DA claims. So once again, Ned claims AF hurts the economy. Well, guess what? AF claims we boost the economy. It makes the DA a form of offense and could be used to make a straight turn. So getting back to the straight turn like I talked about earlier, if you read a non-unique argument plus a link turn, it basically turns the DA into an advantage. Because it says, look, the economy is bad now, but the AF helps boost it. So it turns the DA into a form of offense and becomes essentially your own advantage. We call it a straight turn because it completely turns it. Alright, then on the impact. So first, there's no impact. It argues that the impact doesn't really matter. So it would say economic decline doesn't cause war, or like the economy is resilient. So it's essentially saying, look, the impact isn't going to matter. Nothing's going to happen if the economy declines because there's simply no effect on it. Don't vote us down for this effect they claim. Even if our plan does cause it, it's not going to matter because there's no effect. There's two types of impact events when it comes to this. There's mitigating and terminal. Terminal saying no, nothing will happen at all, and thus like it's a complete takeout. Then there's mitigating, which is a lot easier to win on. It's saying, look, it's not going to be as bad. So if they claim that their impact causes 100 deaths, your mitigating defense would say something like, no, they only cause 50 deaths or 20 deaths. It's still admitting that there will be an impact, but it's going to be a lesser of an impact. And then you could do impact calc based off there to still win the debate. There could still be an impact occurring, but if you're able to prove that your impacts outweigh, it doesn't matter because you still win based off of that. Then there's the impact turn. So I want to preface this by saying, if you're from a lay circuit like Missouri or Indiana, you should not ever be reading this unless you have a good judge. And even then, you want to make sure that they're okay with this, so maybe read their paradigm on tab room before doing so. So this is kind of like a link turn, but it argues that the impact happening is good. For example, economic decline prevents war, or economic decline helps anything else, or war is good, like nuclear war is good. There's a ton of different arguments to make there. I would not recommend this because, once again, as I already explained, a lot of judges don't like it, especially more traditional judges. But if you do read it, you should never read it with a link turn. We call this a double turn. It's essentially saying, like, look, okay, you read the link turn and you say that your plan boosts the economy, but then you say economic decline prevents war. So your plan is taking us away from that impact or just straight up causing that impact to occur. So you never want to double turn yourself. So if you're reading a link turn, don't read an impact turn. If you're reading an impact turn, don't read a link turn. That's pretty much all I have for this lecture. If you have any other questions, please reach out to me. I'm willing to answer them or help out in any way I can.